Jumping right into this one. This is the last episode of the Ae86 build. So the last time you saw the car, it was painted, and on the way home, this is the same day. I just started putting it back together. Putting the doors back on, fitting all the rubber trim, the weather strips. Basically building the door back up as it was emptied out from locks and everything. So this is where you see the result of spending so much time fitting and aligning everything up before paint, because everything just goes back together perfectly. All the lines match and everything just fits beautiful. And back fitting the rear window. That actually isn't as bad as it looks. It's quite easy when they're not glued in, so I'm using a fairly old school method to fit the rear glass. Something called roping in the window. So if you haven't seen this process before, it's actually you just tuck a length of rope or wire inside the rubber gasket, and then pulled out when you placed the window where it needs to be. And then what you actually do is pull the rubber seal over the edge and make it fit like that. So pretty easy. Then back to fitting the rear bumper. I wanted this to get as tucked underneath as it possibly could. So I did spend a couple of tries getting some shims made up in the right size to get it just the way I wanted it. So then it was time to get the rear quarters fitted. I had all the original hardware cleaned and ready. So I started by fitting the lower holders, which are small L-shaped brackets. These brackets actually don't clamp the window down, but rather it makes the window float in the right position until the glue is set. So the trick is to run a pretty high bead of sealant and then set the glass gently against the car, letting it settle into position, just using the holders as a guide instead of just pushing the window down. If you push the window down and squeeze off the sealant, then the window trim won't fit, as you need the glass as high as the holders will allow it to be. And the trim goes on by snapping into the holders, but from the factory they glued them, so put a small dab of sealant on each holder to keep everything in place. And onto the front. I never pulled the front glass. I had it covered up pretty good, so there was a lot of tape glue residue. Also a little overspray, so all that had to be cleaned off. And that being done, I started piecing out all the trim I needed for the front, cleaning it as I go. If you ever tore a car or motorcycle, something like that, apart, you know how many pieces you end up with. So bear that in mind. This is the first Ae86 I've ever worked on. So, and I didn't take the car apart myself. So everything goes on by best guess and experience, just generally working on cars. So some trial and error went into working out where everything goes. So I cleaned the engine bay before emptying out an entire box I had of wiring harnesses, and basically going through them, trying to work out what goes where. So came the time to get the engine fitted. As again, not having pulled the car apart, there was a small glitch. I couldn't fit my crane underneath, so just had to jack it up a little bit, and everything went just back in just as it should. And I put on a new dual pass aluminum radiator from GPI Racing. Back to wiring. Putting in the best of the three engine harnesses I had. At this point I didn't know if it was a lap sensor or whatever, so kind of had to go with the best fitting parts I had. So whatever fitted together was what was put on there. So all three models that I have of the engine harnesses were different years and models, so a little bit guesswork into this. So that's basically the engine, the harness, oil, coolant, whatever. So it's almost ready for the first test fire. When finishing a build like this, there's so much you got to take into account. All the little details, and also the order in which all the stuff gets put back together. There's a natural order that you just can't skip, then something can't be fitted, so you have to take it back off and then refit the part that you need, and then fit the other stuff again. So you need to plan it out something like 3 steps ahead all the time. So underneath the car, it's time for a flywheel, pilot bearing, clutch, and transmission and whatnot to go on. Then filling it. And filling it up with oil before trying to start it. Alright, fingers crossed. And nothing. Also, having put everything together from new, I wasn't really sure it was going to fire right up, so I wasn't even sure about the timing of the fuel or the wiring harness. So I pulled out the number 1 plug and took a look at the timing again just to be sure, making sure that the top dead center was where I needed it to be, making sure that everything was aligned. Also took up the distributor, checked the gear. There's a few dots that needs to be in special places, so it looked, everything just looked right. It just wouldn't fire. So I decided to just, get some time to think and got started on the rear fender flares, putting on the rubber gaskets and fitting them, and just moving on with fitting some parts. At this point, it's really starting to come together, looking kind of like I envisioned it, a black and white Panda. That was really nice. So I'll put on the wheels and move on to the rear. The rear hatch still has all the holes from factory to fit the lock, a stock spoiler and window wiper arm, stuff like that. And I actually wanted to keep it as close to stock as possible, so everything can be fitted again. And all the holes here were pretty easily blanked off and hidden underneath the rear spoiler, which fitted. And up front, it was time to do some more wiring of the front lights. Everything had just been cut, so there was a lot of measuring and looking at colors and just, yeah, basically looking at diagrams, getting everything fitted back up. Then just filling the engine with coolant and having another go at starting it. Still not starting. I gave it a good spray of ether, and after some sputtering and coughing, it fired perfectly up. Making sure it wasn't pissing out coolant or anything else. Checking voltages, exhaust manifold temperature from each cylinder and so on. That's a pretty easy way to make sure that it's running on all cylinders and not misfiring. And also getting fuel, basically doing what it was, that you have the same exhaust temperature on all four. So it seemed to be just perfect. So letting it warm out a little bit and then having a look at the timing. And of course, me being so lucky, my timing gun had a blown bulb, so it's always something. Well, that went well, so I decided to just stare at it. That of course didn't do anything, so remember the engine harness is basically patched up from a couple of other harnesses, so I just tried to match up the parts that I had, basically wanting to run a map sensor and the ECU I thought was made for this, but I was never sure that anything matched up. So eventually it did start and run, but after a few minutes it slowed down, became more rough, and eventually it just died. It wouldn't take the throttle, so I thought it was something with the throttle body, throttle position sensor, something like that, but everything was triple checked and rewired and measured. Nothing was wrong. The fault just seemed to be moving all around. Okay, I needed some time to think, so I just thought, let's go start on something easy. So I started putting in carpet and seats. These had been in storage for the best of 15 years by now, so a little cleaning was in order, getting rid of all the dust and red shit and whatnot. Also, having had almost 3 complete interiors to choose from, I went with the original one from the car, a black and gray. I think it's the best combination. Also, the car was originally white, so I kind of just added the Panda black. Otherwise, it's pretty original. So back on the quick jacks. jacks. I bled the brakes, which always sucks with a completely dry system. I kind of use a method where I just open all the bleed nibbles, and then I just pour brake fluid in the system and just let it drain by gravity. Just let it run when it comes out of whatever nibble. I close that one because it means that it has run all the way down there, and then just wait for the other ones to start dripping. And when they're dripping, I close them, fill up with fluid, and use the good old vacuum brake bleeder. Then I moved on to the exhaust. I like this type of rear muffler. It's the same one I used when I built my twin turbo 350C, so I have a few of those laying around. So I just mocked it up, put on some piping and flanges, and weld it all back together and put it on the car. And just look at that. Just everything here just basically rebuilt. New bolts, new lines, new everything. And putting it back together, and it ran for a short while. I thought, why not have a little celebration burnout without smashing it into the silica. So the car still wouldn't run right, and the fault still was pretty random. So I just decided, why not go the programmable ECU? So I'm upgrading the ignition system, putting on a Speedoino, and doing videos on that later. So remember to subscribe and get notifications on that later. And just look at this result.